In this powerful video, we follow the inspiring journey of Captain Maya Carter, a dedicated and determined law enforcement officer who takes on the monumental task of reforming a police department rife with corruption and distrust. Faced with resistance from within her own ranks and skepticism from the community, Maya embarks on a mission to restore accountability, rebuild broken relationships, and create lasting change. Through challenges, setbacks, and moments of doubt, she shows what it truly means to lead with integrity, listen with empathy, and stand up for what's right. Her story serves as a testament to the strength of resilience and the transformative power of honest leadership in difficult times. Before we dive into this gripping tale of reform and resilience, comment below where you're watching from today. And if you enjoy this inspiring story of leadership and change, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more incredible stories like this one. Captain Maya Carter had always been someone who could command attention. From the very first day she wore her police uniform, Maya knew her path would be anything but easy. Being both a black woman and a law enforcement officer brought unique challenges, but she faced each one with courage, determination, and grace. Over the years, Maya had risen through the ranks, not through politics or favoritism, but through grit, competence, and intelligence. Now a well-respected captain, she often reminded herself of how far she had come. That evening, however, she wasn't wearing her uniform. Maya was simply herself, enjoying a rare moment of normalcy. The sky was painted with streaks of purple and orange as dusk settled over the city. Maya loved this time of day, a brief pause as the city transitioned from its chaotic hustle to a quieter calm. Maya had spent the last hour in a neighborhood grocery store. The mundane task of shopping was a reprieve from the relentless pressures of her job. The rhythmic hum of the store and the occasional chatter of customers offered a soothing backdrop to her thoughts. She placed a loaf of freshly baked sourdough bread into her basket, already envisioning the dinner she had planned for the night. Dressed casually in dark jeans and a gray sweatshirt, Maya felt at ease as she wandered the aisles. Her badge and service weapon were discreetly tucked away in her purse, hidden under her arm. Though her responsibilities as a captain never truly left her, moments like these allowed her to blend into the crowd, just another face among many. After paying for her groceries, Maya stepped outside, greeted by a gentle breeze. The streets were lively, but not overly crowded. A group of teenagers laughed as they strolled past, and cyclists whizzed by. Maya smiled to herself, momentarily lost in the joy of such simple, everyday moments. Slinging the grocery bag over her shoulder, she began her short walk back to her apartment. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Pulling it out, she glanced at the screen. A message from her partner, Emma. "When will you be home?" Maya quickly typed a reply, "On my way. Just finished shopping. See you in 10. It was a routine evening, ordinary in every way, or so she thought. 2 blocks away, Officer Ryan Gallagher sat in his patrol car, restless and eager for action. The day had been uneventful so far, just a traffic stop and a noise complaint. As a young officer early in his career, Ryan thrived on high-stakes situations. He had joined the force with a strong desire to make a difference, but the long stretches of uneventful shifts often left him impatient. When the dispatcher's voice crackled over the radio, Ryan sat upright, his attention sharpening. "All units, we have a 10 to 31 in progress. Robbery suspect, black female, mid-30s, wearing dark jeans and a gray sweatshirt. Last seen heading west on Oak and Madison." "Unit 22, copy that," Ryan replied into his radio, his voice resolute. "Heading to Oak and Madison now." Adrenaline coursed through him as he started his car and scanned the streets for anyone who matched the description. He replayed the details in his head. Black female, mid-30s, gray sweatshirt, dark jeans. As his squad car turned down Madison Street, he saw her, a woman walking leisurely, a grocery bag slung over her shoulder. She fit the description perfectly. Ryan's instincts kicked in, and his heart raced. The suspect was calm, even nonchalant, likely trying to blend in, he thought. He pulled his car to the curb, his eyes locked on the woman. "Ma'am, stop right there," Ryan called out, his voice firm and commanding. Maya froze, confused. The words hadn't fully registered yet. She turned slowly, blinking against the bright headlights of the police cruiser. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked, her tone measured but slightly wary. Ryan's posture was rigid, his hand hovering near his holstered weapon. "Hands where I can see them," he barked, the authority in his voice leaving no room for negotiation. Maya frowned, her confusion deepening. As a captain, she'd witnessed tense situations before, but never had she been on the receiving end of such suspicion. "Officer, there's been some kind of mistake," she began, keeping her voice calm and steady. "I'm Captain Maya Carter, 4th Precinct." Ryan's pulse quickened. He had heard all the excuses before. In his mind, this was just another suspect trying to talk their way out of an arrest. "Yeah, right?" he muttered under his breath, stepping closer. "Turn around. Hands behind your back." Before Maya could fully process what was happening, Ryan grabbed her arm, spinning her around with startling force. Her purse hit the ground, spilling its contents, including her badge. "Stop! My badge is right there!" Maya protested, her voice rising as the cold steel of the handcuffs snapped around her wrists. Ryan ignored her words, convinced he was following proper procedure. His training and assumptions told him that she fit the description and was likely lying to avoid arrest. "Officer, you're making a huge mistake," Maya said, her voice trembling with frustration. "I'm Captain Carter. Look in my purse." But Ryan was already leading her toward the back of his squad car. Maya's mind raced, a storm of disbelief and humiliation washing over her. How could this be happening? How could one of her own officers treat her like this? As the squad car door slammed shut, Maya stared out the window at the crowd that had gathered. Faces filled with confusion and concern watched as the scene unfolded. Phones were raised, recording every moment. To them, it was yet another arrest of a black woman by a white officer, a story that had become far too common, and one that never failed to spark outrage. Maya sat in stunned silence as the city lights blurred past the car's windows. This wasn't just a mistake. This was something much deeper, much more troubling. What happened next would change everything. The cold steel bench beneath her felt unforgiving, matching the sterile atmosphere of the holding cell. Captain Maya Carter sat there, her wrists sore from the handcuffs that had only just been removed. Her mind churned, replaying the events of the past hour in a relentless loop. The humiliation, the disbelief, the anger, it all coiled tightly in her chest. The faint buzz of fluorescent lights above her head added to the suffocating stillness. The gray cinder-block walls seemed to close in, amplifying her isolation. It was surreal, almost unthinkable. How could she, a captain with over a decade of service, find herself in this situation? Maya massaged her wrists absent-mindedly, the sting of the cuffs lingering. But the physical discomfort paled in comparison to the emotional weight pressing down on her. She had fought her entire career to be seen as an equal, to prove that she belonged in a field dominated by bias and prejudice. Yet here she was, stripped of her authority, reduced to a suspect by one of her own officers. The door to the holding area creaked open, pulling Maya from her thoughts. Sergeant Laura Martinez entered, her expression a mix of disbelief and concern. "Maya, Captain Carter," Laura corrected herself quickly, her voice laced with urgency. "What the hell happened?" Maya stood, brushing off her sweatshirt more out of habit than necessity. "I think you already know, Sergeant," she replied coolly, though the edge in her voice was unmistakable. Laura swallowed hard, her gaze shifting uncomfortably. "Officer Gallagher didn't realize. Maya cut her off, her tone sharpening. "Didn't realize what, Laura? That I was a captain? That I was innocent? Or that he let his assumptions override his judgment?" Laura flinched but didn't look away. I'm so sorry. I'll fix this. Let me get you out of here right now." She fumbled with the keys on her belt, unlocking the door to the holding cell. Maya stepped out, her back straight, her face a mask of composure. But inside, a storm raged. She followed Laura down the hallway, ignoring the sidelong glances from passing officers. Whispers filled the air, their voices too low to make out the words, but loud enough to remind her of the spectacle she had become. They reached a private office, and Laura closed the door behind them. Maya leaned against the desk, crossing her arms as she studied the sergeant. "Does Gallagher know who I am now?" Maya asked, her voice icy. Laura nodded, her expression contrite. "Yes, he's filing the report now. He's shaken, Captain. I don't think he realized." Maya raised an eyebrow, cutting her off again. "He didn't realize because he didn't bother to listen. I told him who I was, Laura. Multiple times. But he didn't see a person. He saw a threat. The weight of Maya's words hung heavily in the air. Laura opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, the door swung open. Standing there, pale and visibly shaken, was Officer Ryan Gallagher. His eyes widened as they met Maya's, a mix of guilt and dread etched into his features. "Captain Carter," Ryan stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. Maya turned fully to face him, her expression unreadable. For a long moment she said nothing, letting the weight of the situation settle over him. The silence was deafening. "You arrested me," Maya began, her tone calm but unyielding. "Without checking my ID, without listening to me. You ignored my words and jumped to conclusions. Why?" Ryan fidgeted, his hands twitching nervously at his sides. "I was just following the description from dispatch," he said, his voice faltering. "It matched you perfectly. I thought I was doing the right thing." Maya's jaw tightened, but her voice remained steady. "The right thing," she echoed. "The right thing would have been to take a moment, to ask for identification, to listen. Instead, you saw what you wanted to see." Ryan's face flushed with shame, his eyes darting to the floor. "I didn't mean—" "What you meant doesn't matter," Maya interrupted, her voice rising slightly. "What matters is what you did. You didn't see me as a person, as your captain. You saw a black woman in a gray sweatshirt, and you assumed I was guilty." The silence that followed was suffocating. Laura shifted uncomfortably, glancing between the two. "I'm sorry, Captain," Ryan said finally, his voice trembling. "I never meant to disrespect you. I never meant for any of this to happen." "I'm sure you didn't," Maya replied, her tone softening just a fraction. "But your intentions don't erase your actions. This isn't just about me, Officer Gallagher. This is about how we, as law enforcement, treat the people we're supposed to protect." Ryan nodded slowly, his shoulders slumping under the weight of her words. "This department has a problem," Maya continued, turning to Laura now. "And it's not just about bias, it's about accountability. If Gallagher couldn't listen to me, his captain, what does that say about how he treats civilians?" Laura nodded, her expression grave. "I'll make sure this is addressed, Captain. We'll start an internal review and recommend training on bias and protocol." Maya sighed, leaning back against the desk. "Good. But it's not enough, Laura. This isn't just about training. It's about changing the culture of this department. What happened to me shouldn't happen to anyone ever again." Just as Laura was about to respond, a knock at the door interrupted them. A young officer poked his head in, his face tense. "Captain Carter, the chief wants to see you," he said, his tone cautious. Maya straightened, nodding curtly. "I'll be right there." As she followed the officer toward the chief's office, her mind raced. The humiliation she had endured was unbearable, but it also illuminated the deep flaws within the department she had devoted her life to. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about something much larger, something systemic. And as Maya stepped into Chief Alan Morris's office, she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't going to let this go. Captain Maya Carter sat across from Chief Alan Morris, his usually composed demeanor betrayed by the slight furrow in his brow. His office, lined with plaques and commendations, felt colder than usual, the weight of the situation pressing down on both of them. "Maya," Chief Morris began, his voice calm but measured, "I don't even know where to start." Maya leaned back slightly, her arms crossed. "How about we start with one of your officers handcuffing me on the street and ignoring every word I said?" The chief sighed deeply, rubbing his temples. "It's an unacceptable mistake. I've already spoken to Gallagher. He's rattled, completely blindsided by the fact that he arrested his own captain." "Blindsided?" Maya echoed, her voice sharp. "Chief, this isn't about him being blindsided. It's about the fact that he didn't listen, didn't question his own assumptions, and let his biases dictate his actions. If he couldn't recognize me, what would happen when he was dealing with a civilian? This isn't just about me, and you know it." The chief nodded slowly, acknowledging the truth in her words. "You're right, Maya. And it's not just Gallagher. This department has to do better. But you know as well as I do, change doesn't happen overnight." Maya straightened in her chair, her gaze unwavering. "Then we need to start now, because what happened to me is going viral, Chief. If we don't act decisively, this department's credibility will be shredded." As if on cue, a sharp knock sounded at the door. The chief's assistant stepped in, her face pale. "Sir, you need to see this," she said, holding out a tablet. Chief Morris took the device, his expression darkening as he watched the screen. Maya didn't need to ask, she already knew what it was. The video of her arrest, captured by a bystander, had made its way online. The recording was shaky but clear enough. Maya was standing on the sidewalk, her grocery bag spilling its contents as Ryan handcuffed her. Her voice, calm yet firm, was audible, insisting that she was Captain Maya Carter. But Ryan's dismissal and the clink of handcuffs spoke louder than her words. Maya could see the growing horror on the chief's face as he watched. He placed the tablet down and looked up at her, his expression grim. "It's bad." "It's the truth," Maya replied. "And now the entire city is going to see it." Outside the precinct, the ripple effects of the video were already being felt. Protesters had gathered, their voices rising in chants of anger and frustration. Signs reading "Justice for All" and "End Police Bias" were held high as the crowd swelled, spilling into the streets. Maya stood by a window on the second floor, watching the scene below. The chants were loud and persistent, cutting through the usual hum of city life. "They're not wrong," Maya said aloud, not realizing Sergeant Laura Martinez had entered the room. Laura stepped beside her, following her gaze to the protest below. "No, they're not," Laura admitted. "But the department is in full panic mode. The mayor's been calling the chief non-stop. They're worried about how this is going to play out." Maya turned to her, her expression hard. "Worried about optics, not about the actual problem." Laura hesitated before responding. "You're right, but this department isn't built for rapid change. You know that better than anyone." Maya's jaw tightened. Then it's time to rebuild it. The protests outside the precinct grew louder as the hours passed. By the evening, news crews had arrived, their cameras capturing every chant, every sign, every impassioned speech. Reporters spoke solemnly into microphones, their commentary accompanied by clips of the now viral arrest video. Maya's phone buzzed incessantly, calls, texts, and emails from colleagues, community leaders, and even friends she hadn't heard from in years. But one message stood out. "How are you holding up? Call me if you need to talk." Maya exhaled deeply, feeling a pang of relief at the reminder that amidst the chaos, she had someone who understood her. The chief's assistant knocked softly at her office door, stepping in cautiously. "Captain Carter, the mayor's office wants you to attend a press conference tomorrow morning." Maya frowned. "A press conference?" "Yes," the assistant continued. "The mayor wants to address the protests and the video. He's asking you to speak." Maya's stomach tightened. Speaking publicly about her own wrongful arrest was not something she had anticipated. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized this could be an opportunity, her chance to push for real change. The next morning, Maya stood backstage at the makeshift podium set up outside City Hall. The crowd of reporters and community members was overwhelming, their voices blending into a low hum of anticipation. Mayor Andrew Bennett approached her, his polished demeanor firmly in place. "Captain Carter," he said smoothly, extending his hand. Maya shook it, though her expression remained stoic. "Mr. Mayor, I appreciate you agreeing to speak," he said, his tone rehearsed. "We need to show the community that we're united in addressing this." Maya resisted the urge to roll her eyes. Addressing this was a political code for damage control. But she nodded, knowing this was her moment to steer the narrative toward real reform. As the mayor delivered his opening remarks, carefully worded statements about the importance of trust between the police and the community, Maya scanned the crowd. Protesters were visible in the distance, their chants faint but persistent. When the mayor finished, he gestured toward Maya. "Captain Carter would like to say a few words." The cameras turned toward her, their lenses glaring like unblinking eyes. Maya stepped forward, her heart pounding. "Good morning," she began, her voice steady despite the pressure. "What happened to me 2 days ago wasn't just a mistake, it was a symptom of a larger problem, one that has plagued not only this department but law enforcement as a whole." The crowd fell silent, the tension palpable. Maya continued, her words deliberate. "This isn't just about one officer's error in judgment. It's about the biases, both conscious and unconscious, that shape our actions. It's about accountability, it's about trust, and it's about the urgent need for reform." Her voice grew stronger, the passion in her words undeniable. We cannot afford to ignore these issues any longer. The community deserves better. The officers who wear this uniform deserve better. And I will not rest until we begin to make meaningful, lasting changes." The reporters scrambled to jot down her words, their cameras clicking furiously. Maya finished her speech with a call to action. "This is not the end of the story. It's the beginning. And I'm committed to making sure that what happened to me never happens to anyone else, ever again." As she stepped back from the podium, the crowd erupted in questions. Maya didn't answer any of them. Instead, she walked away, her resolve burning brighter than ever. The next day, Captain Maya Carter found herself in the thick of the fallout. The protests outside the precinct had swelled, with hundreds of people now gathered. Their chants reverberated through the city streets. Justice for all. End police bias. Banners waved in the air, some bearing Maya's name, others echoing calls for systemic reform. Inside the precinct, the tension was equally palpable. Officers moved quietly, their usual banter replaced by uneasy glances and whispered conversations. Every screen in the building seemed to be replaying the now viral video of Maya's arrest, a glaring reminder of the department's failure. Maya sat in her office, reviewing a draft of the reforms she had been advocating for long before this incident. These proposals, a comprehensive overhaul of training protocols, mandatory bias education, and the creation of an independent oversight committee, now carried an even greater urgency. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. Chief Alan Morris stepped in, his expression serious but measured. "Maya," he said, closing the door behind him. "The mayor's office has called for another press conference this afternoon. They want you to speak again." Maya arched an eyebrow. "More damage control?" The chief hesitated before replying. "That's part of it, but I think this is your chance to push for the changes you've been fighting for." Maya nodded slowly, her mind already racing. This wasn't just about addressing public outrage anymore. It was about laying the groundwork for real, tangible reform. That afternoon, the press conference was held in a larger venue to accommodate the swelling media presence. The steps of City Hall were crowded with reporters, protesters, and curious onlookers. A row of microphones stood ready at the podium, their shiny surfaces reflecting the afternoon sun. Maya adjusted her blazer, feeling the weight of the moment. To her left stood Mayor Andrew Bennett, his polished demeanor masking the political tightrope he was walking. To her right was Chief Morris, his expression unreadable. The mayor spoke first, delivering a carefully scripted address filled with platitudes about unity, accountability, and the department's commitment to change. His words were met with polite applause from some quarters and skeptical murmurs from others. When he finished, he gestured toward Maya. "Captain Carter has a few words she'd like to share." Maya stepped forward, gripping the sides of the podium. The crowd quieted, their attention fully on her. Cameras clicked furiously, capturing every move she made. "Good afternoon," Maya began, her voice calm but resolute. "Yesterday, I stood here and shared my personal experience. Today, I want to focus on what comes next because this is bigger than me." She paused, letting her words settle. "What happened to me was not an isolated incident," she continued. "It was a reflection of systemic issues that we, as law enforcement officers, must confront. Bias, whether conscious or unconscious, affects how we interact with the people we are sworn to protect. And if we fail to address it, we fail the very communities we serve." The crowd was silent, hanging on her every word. Even the protesters had quieted, their signs held aloft as they listened. "This department," Maya said, her voice growing stronger, "has the opportunity to lead by example. It is important to show the world that change is not only possible but necessary. That means implementing real, meaningful reforms, not just words, but actions." Maya outlined her proposed reforms, speaking passionately about each one. Mandatory bias training for all officers, revised protocols to ensure fair and thorough decision-making in the field, an independent oversight committee to provide accountability and transparency. "These changes are not optional," she said firmly. "They are essential. Without them, we cannot hope to rebuild the trust that has been broken, not just between this department and the community, but within the department itself." Her voice softened as she concluded, "I know that change is hard. I know it will take time. But I also know that it is worth it. Every person in this city deserves to feel safe, respected, and valued, and every officer who wears this badge should feel proud of the work they do. Together, we can make that happen. As she stepped back from the podium, a wave of applause broke out. It wasn't universal. There were still pockets of skepticism and resistance, but it was enough to tell Maya that her words had landed. The reporters wasted no time, shouting questions as Maya moved to step away. "Captain Carter, do you think the department can truly change? Do you believe Officer Gallagher should be fired? Was this incident racially motivated?" Maya turned back briefly, addressing the crowd once more. "Change isn't easy," she said simply, "but it's necessary, and it starts here." Back at the precinct, Maya returned to her office, exhausted but determined. The day's events had been another step forward, but she knew the real work was just beginning. Emma called her that evening, her voice warm and grounding. "I saw the press conference," she said. "You were incredible." Maya allowed herself a small smile. "Thanks, Em. It feels like a drop in the ocean, though. There's still so much to do." Emma's voice softened. "One step at a time, Maya. You've already done more than most people would even try." Their conversation reminded Maya of the importance of having support, of having someone who believed in her, even when the challenges seemed insurmountable. That night, Maya sat at her desk long after the precinct had quieted down. Her computer screen glowed softly as she typed, refining her proposals for reform. Outside, the faint hum of the city continued, a reminder of the world she was working to change. She paused, glancing at a small photo on her desk, a picture of her academy graduation. In it, she stood proudly in her crisp uniform, her younger self filled with hope and determination. Maya allowed herself a moment of reflection. Despite the challenges, despite the setbacks, that hope was still there. And she wasn't going to stop until the department she loved was one she could truly be proud of. The sound of chanting outside the precinct grew louder by the hour. By now, the protests had taken on a life of their own. Crowds spilled into the surrounding streets, holding up signs with bold slogans like "Accountability Now" and "Maya Carter Speaks for Us All." The energy was electric, a mix of frustration, hope, and determination. Inside the precinct, the atmosphere was far more subdued. Officers moved stiffly through the halls, their conversations hushed and their expressions tense. For many, the protests outside were not just a public spectacle. They were a reckoning. Captain Maya Carter observed it all from the window of her office. She could hear the faint chants muffled by the thick glass, but the message was clear. The community was demanding real change, and they were looking to her to lead it. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. She turned to see Chief Alan Morris standing in the doorway, his face grim. "Got a minute?" he asked. Maya gestured for him to enter. "Let me guess, another call from the mayor?" The chief nodded as he sat down. "He's panicking. The protests are bigger than we expected, and the media isn't letting up. He wants this resolved before it spirals any further." Maya raised an eyebrow. "Resolved? What does that even mean?" Chief Morris sighed heavily, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "He's talking about forming a task force to investigate what happened and to review your proposals. But between you and me, it's more about optics than actual reform." Maya's jaw tightened. She had expected resistance, but the thought of her proposals being watered down for the sake of appearances was infuriating. "And what about Officer Gallagher?" she asked. "He's been placed on administrative leave, pending the investigation." Morris replied, "But the union's already gearing up to defend him. They're claiming it was a reasonable mistake." Maya's hands clenched into fists. "A reasonable mistake? Handcuffing your own captain without listening to a word she says? That's what they're calling it?" "I don't agree with them, Maya," Morris said firmly. "But you know how this works. The union's priority is to protect their officers, no matter what." Maya exhaled slowly, trying to rein in her frustration. "This isn't just about Gallagher. It's about the culture that allowed this to happen. And if the union can't see that, then we have a bigger problem than I thought." That afternoon, Maya attended a meeting with Mayor Andrew Bennett and his senior aides. The mayor's office was as sleek and polished as he was, with walls adorned by photos of ribbon cuttings and community events. But the warmth in those images felt hollow compared to the tension in the room. "Captain Carter, thank you for coming," the mayor said as she entered. His tone was polite but carried an undercurrent of urgency. "Mayor Bennett," Maya replied, taking a seat across from him. The mayor folded his hands on the table, leaning forward slightly. "Let's get straight to it. The protests are growing, the media's all over this, and the community is demanding answers. We need to find a way to de-escalate this situation before it gets out of control." "De-escalate?" Maya repeated, her voice calm but pointed. "With all due respect, Mayor, this isn't about de-escalation. It's about addressing the root cause of the problem. People are angry because they've lost faith in us, and the only way to restore that faith is through real, meaningful reform." The mayor's aides exchanged uneasy glances, but he kept his gaze on Maya. "I understand that, Captain, but these changes you're proposing, they're ambitious. Overhauling training programs, establishing an independent oversight committee, that's going to require significant resources and buy-in from multiple stakeholders. We have to be realistic." "Realistic?" Maya's tone sharpened. "What's realistic about ignoring a problem that's staring us in the face? These reforms aren't optional, they're necessary. And if we don't act now, we're going to lose more than just public trust. We're going to lose lives." The room fell silent. The mayor's expression shifted slightly, a flicker of acknowledgement crossing his face. "You're asking us to move mountains, Captain," he said finally. "I'm asking you to do what's right," Maya replied. Back at the precinct, Maya returned to her office, feeling both frustrated and invigorated. The mayor had agreed to review her proposals and discuss them further with the city council, but she knew that was just the beginning. Convincing the higher-ups was one thing, convincing the rank-and-file officers was another entirely. She glanced at the pile of paperwork on her desk. Reports, drafts of policy changes, and emails from community leaders offering support. The weight of it all was overwhelming, but Maya wasn't one to back down from a challenge. Her phone buzzed, pulling her attention away. It was a text from Emma. "Protests are on the news again. You're trending. Call me when you get a break." Maya allowed herself a small smile. No matter how chaotic things became, Emma was always her anchor. Outside the precinct, the protests showed no signs of slowing. Community leaders had joined the crowd, giving impassioned speeches about justice and accountability. One speaker, a local activist named Tasha Hayes, stood on a makeshift stage with a megaphone in hand. "This isn't just about Captain Carter," Tasha said, her voice carrying over the crowd. "This is about every person who's ever been dismissed, disrespected, or dehumanized by the system. We're not asking for favors, we're demanding change." The crowd erupted into applause, their voices rising in unison. No justice, no peace. Inside, Maya watched the scene from the window, a mix of pride and sadness swirling in her chest. She was grateful for the support, but the sheer magnitude of the protests was a stark reminder of how much work lay ahead. That evening, as Maya packed up her desk to head home, Chief Morris stopped by her office. "Long day," he said, leaning against the doorframe. "Just another one in a long line," Maya replied with a faint smile. Morris hesitated before speaking again. "Look, I know this isn't going to be easy. You're going to face pushback from the union, from officers, even from some of the community. But I believe in what you're doing. And I want you to know I have your back." Maya looked up at him, surprised by the rare display of vulnerability. "Thank you, Chief. That means a lot." As she left the precinct and stepped into the cool evening air, the chants from the protesters filled her ears once more. Their signs and voices were a constant reminder of the stakes, but they were also a source of strength. Maya knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult, but she was ready. She had no choice. Captain Maya Carter sat in the precinct's conference room, a stack of carefully prepared documents spread out before her. She had spent countless hours drafting her reform proposals, ensuring every detail was backed by data and aligned with the department's mission. These weren't just ideas, they were a blueprint for change. Across the table sat the leadership team of the police department, including Chief Alan Morris, along with representatives from the police union. The union's president, James Coleman, was a seasoned negotiator known for his no-nonsense demeanor. Maya knew this meeting would be one of the hardest battles she'd face. Chief Morris opened the meeting, his voice steady but firm. "Thank you all for coming. Today, We're here to discuss Captain Carter's reform proposals, which are aimed at addressing systemic issues within our department. Maya nodded, taking the floor. These reforms are not about placing blame, they're about ensuring that incidents like what happened to me and countless others never happen again. We owe it to ourselves and the community to do better. She launched into her presentation, outlining the key elements of her plan. 1. Mandatory bias training. Every officer would participate in workshops designed to identify and mitigate unconscious biases. 2. Revised arrest protocols. Clear guidelines to ensure officers verify identification and follow due process before making arrests. 3. Bookmark. Independent Oversight Committee. A civilian-led board to review complaints against officers and increase transparency. As Maya spoke, she noticed the varying reactions around the table. Some nodded in agreement, while others, particularly Coleman, wore skeptical expressions. When she finished, Coleman leaned forward, his voice sharp. Captain Carter, I respect what you're trying to do here, but these changes you're proposing, they're going to tie our hands. Our officers are already stretched thin. Adding more training and oversight is only going to make their jobs harder. Maya met his gaze, unflinching. With all due respect, Mr. Coleman, this isn't about making anyone's job harder. It's about making sure we're doing our jobs right. Bias, whether conscious or unconscious, affects decision-making. If we ignore that, we're not just failing the community, we're failing ourselves. Coleman's expression hardened. You're asking officers to second-guess their instincts in situations where split-second decisions can mean life or death. That's not realistic. I'm asking officers to be better, Maya countered, her voice unwavering. To be thoughtful, deliberate, and fair. This isn't about hesitation, it's about precision. And if we don't address these issues now, the consequences will be far greater than a few additional hours of training. The room fell silent, the weight of her words settling over the group. Chief Morris broke the tension, clearing his throat. Captain Carter has made valid points. These reforms aren't just about avoiding future incidents, they're about restoring trust. That trust is crucial if we want to effectively serve this city. Coleman leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. The union will need to review these proposals in detail before we can support anything. And let's not forget, implementing these changes will require resources we don't have. Maya sighed, her frustration evident. We always seem to find money for new equipment, for PR campaigns. But when it comes to investing in our people, there's always an excuse. If we can't prioritize training and accountability, what are we even doing here? The meeting stretched on for hours, with heated debates over every detail of the proposals. Maya stayed composed, countering each argument with facts and examples. By the time the meeting adjourned, they had reached a tentative agreement. The union would support the reforms, but with certain concessions, such as staggered implementation to minimize disruption. Maya left the conference room feeling both exhausted and resolute. It wasn't everything she had hoped for, but it was a start. Later that evening, Maya returned home to find Emma waiting for her. The house was quiet, and the warm glow of lamps created a cozy contrast to the chaos of her day. "How'd it go?" Emma asked, handing Maya a steaming cup of tea. Maya sank into the couch, exhaling deeply. "Progress. Not as much as I wanted, but progress." Emma smiled gently. "That's still a win." Maya sipped her tea, the warmth soothing her frayed nerves. "It's frustrating, though. The resistance, the pushback, it feels endless. But I know it's worth it. It has to be." Emma placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You're fighting the good fight, Maya, and you're not alone in this." For the first time that day, Maya allowed herself to relax, leaning into Emma's support. The following week was a whirlwind of activity. Maya worked tirelessly to finalize the details of the reform plan, meeting with community leaders, department heads, and even the mayor's office. She knew that gaining widespread support was crucial for the reforms to succeed. During one meeting, a community activist named Tasha Hayes commended Maya's efforts. "Captain Carter, you're doing what so many people have been asking for. These changes mean everything to us. But remember, this isn't just about policies, it's about culture. Changing hearts and minds takes time." Maya nodded, taking Tasha's words to heart. "You're right, policies are just the beginning, but they're a foundation we can build on." As the reforms began to take shape, Maya made a point of visiting precincts across the city to explain the changes directly to the officers who would be most affected. At one precinct, she faced a particularly skeptical group. "This feels like punishment," one officer said, his arms crossed. "Like you're blaming all of us for what happened to you." Maya's expression softened, but her tone remained firm. "This isn't about blame. It's about growth. None of us are perfect, and that includes me. But if we're not willing to learn and adapt, we're doing a disservice to the badge we wear." Another officer chimed in, her tone more conciliatory. "I get that, but it feels like the department doesn't trust us." Maya looked around the room, meeting each officer's gaze. "Trust has to be earned by all of us. These reforms aren't about undermining you. They're about building trust with the community and with each other. That starts here." The officers murmured among themselves, their resistance beginning to soften. Maya knew it wouldn't happen overnight, but she could see the first signs of progress. Back at her office, Maya reviewed the latest feedback on the reforms. Some officers had voiced concerns, but others had expressed support, thanking her for taking the lead. The mixed reactions were a reminder of how difficult change could be, but Maya was undeterred. As she prepared for another round of meetings, her phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Don't forget to breathe. Dinner's waiting when you're done." Maya smiled, feeling a surge of gratitude. No matter how chaotic her days were, Emma's unwavering support was her anchor. By the end of the week, the final draft of the reform plan was ready to be presented to the city council. It wasn't perfect, and there were still battles ahead, but Maya knew she had taken an important step forward. Sitting in her office that night, she allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. The protests, the politics, the pushback, it had all been worth it. This wasn't just about fixing the department, it was about building a future where mistakes like hers wouldn't happen again. Captain Maya Carter's reform proposals had been finalized and approved by the city council, but the battle was far from over. The real challenge lay in implementing them. The pushback from within the department, particularly from some rank-and-file officers, was immediate and palpable. Walking through the precinct halls, Maya could feel the tension in the air. Conversations quieted as she passed, and she caught sidelong glances that were less about respect and more about suspicion. She understood the discomfort. That change was hard, and that for some, it felt like an attack on the status quo. Maya had anticipated resistance, but its intensity surprised even her. Officers who had once worked alongside her with camaraderie now seemed hesitant, unsure of how to reconcile her leadership with their grievances. One afternoon, she attended a department-wide meeting to introduce the new mandatory bias training program. The session was led by a professional facilitator, but Maya wanted to be there in person to address concerns and show her support for the initiative. As the facilitator explained the goals of the program to help officers recognize and counteract unconscious biases, Maya noticed a mix of reactions in the room. Some officers listened attentively, nodding along. Others crossed their arms, their skepticism written all over their faces. During the Q&A session, one officer, Rick Daniels, stood up. His tone was sharp as he spoke. "Captain, with all due respect, this feels like we're being singled out. You're assuming we're all biased, that we're not already doing our jobs fairly. Isn't that insulting?" Maya stood, addressing him directly. "Officer Daniels, I understand how you feel. This isn't about accusing anyone of bias. It's about recognizing that we all have blind spots, myself included. This training isn't a punishment. It's a tool to help us be better, to make sure that when we make decisions, they're based on facts, not assumptions." Another officer, Sarah Brooks, chimed in, her tone softer. "I get that, Captain. But what about the pressure this puts on us? We're already stretched thin. Adding more training sessions and oversight feels like we're being buried under bureaucracy." Maya nodded, acknowledging her point. "I hear you, Officer Brooks. The goal here isn't to make your jobs harder. It's to make them smarter and more effective. These reforms are about building trust with the community and with each other. I know it's not easy, but I believe it's worth it." The room fell quiet, her words lingering in the air. Maya could see that while some officers were warming to the idea, others remained resistant. Change was never easy, and she knew this was only the beginning. Over the next few weeks, The bias training sessions rolled out across the department. Maya made it a point to attend as many as she could, sitting in on workshops and engaging in discussions. She wanted her officers to see that she wasn't just imposing these changes from above. She was part of the process, learning and growing alongside them. During one session, a young officer named Jason Patel approached her during a break. "Captain Carter," he said, his voice hesitant, "I just wanted to say, I wasn't sure about this training at first, but it's been eye-opening. I never realized how much my own assumptions could influence my decisions." Maya smiled, her voice warm. "Thank you for sharing that, Officer Patel. It takes courage to look inward and be honest with yourself. That's exactly what this training is about." His words bolstered her resolve. For every skeptic, there were officers like Patel, willing to learn, to grow, and to embrace the changes. While the bias training progressed, Maya also focused on implementing the revised arrest protocols. The new guidelines required officers to verify identification and gather additional evidence before making arrests, especially in cases where descriptions were vague. Not everyone was on board. In a precinct-wide briefing, Maya explained the new protocols, emphasizing their importance in preventing wrongful arrests. "We're not asking you to hesitate," she said firmly. "We're asking you to verify. This is to ensure that when you act, you're doing so with all the information you need. These protocols aren't about second-guessing. They're about precision." Despite her clear explanation, the resistance persisted. After the briefing, a group of officers lingered in the hallway, their frustration evident. "This is ridiculous," one muttered. "We're being micromanaged." Another added, "They don't trust us anymore." That's what this is about. Maya overheard their comments but chose not to respond. Instead, she made a mental note to address their concerns directly. She knew that building trust within the department was just as important as rebuilding trust with the community. As part of her efforts, Maya scheduled one-on-one meetings with officers who had voiced strong opposition to the reforms. These conversations were often tense but necessary. In one such meeting, she sat across from Officer Rick Daniels, who had been one of the most vocal critics of the changes. "Rick," Maya began, her tone calm, "I know you've been frustrated with these reforms. I want to understand where you're coming from." Daniels sighed, leaning back in his chair. "Captain, I've been on this force for over 10 years. I've always done my job the right way. And now it feels like all of that is being questioned." Maya leaned forward, her expression earnest. "I'm not questioning your dedication or your integrity, but we have to acknowledge that the way we've always done things isn't perfect. These changes aren't about punishing good officers. They're about making sure we're all working toward the same goal: fairness, accountability, and trust." Daniels was silent for a moment, his gaze fixed on the desk. "I just don't want to feel like I'm walking on eggshells every time I make a decision." "I understand that," Maya said gently. "But I also believe that with the right tools and training, you'll feel more confident in those decisions, not less." By the end of their conversation, Daniels wasn't fully convinced, but he seemed more open. It was a small victory, but Maya knew that every step forward mattered. At home, Emma continued to be a pillar of support. One evening, after a particularly grueling day, Maya collapsed onto the couch with a heavy sigh. "Tough day?" Emma asked, sitting beside her. "Tough month," Maya replied, her voice weary. "The resistance is draining. I know it's normal, but it's hard not to take it personally." Emma placed a reassuring hand on Maya's. "You're doing something that scares people, Maya. You're challenging the way they've always done things. But that's how change happens. It starts with discomfort." Maya smiled faintly. "You always know what to say." "That's my job," Emma teased, leaning in to kiss her cheek. In that quiet moment, Maya felt a renewed sense of strength. She wasn't alone in this fight. As the weeks went on, Maya began to see glimmers of progress. Officers who had initially resisted the reforms started to engage with the training, sharing stories of how it had changed their perspectives. The revised protocols, though met with grumbling, began to yield results: fewer complaints from the community and fewer mistakes. Maya knew there was still a long way to go, but for the first time, she felt hopeful. The seeds of change had been planted, and now it was up to her and her team to nurture them. As Maya continued to push forward with her reforms, she found that the resistance within the department was matched by the scrutiny from the community. Public opinion was just as divided, and the media coverage of the changes was a double-edged sword. Some praised her bold moves, while others questioned whether her plans would actually result in meaningful improvements. One morning, Maya received an unexpected invitation to attend a community town hall meeting. The event was being hosted by a local activist group that had long been critical of the police department. Maya knew the meeting could be a fiery one, but she saw it as an opportunity to engage directly with the very community she was trying to protect. The meeting was held in a crowded community center. When Maya arrived, she was greeted with a mix of applause and skepticism. Some attendees clapped, recognizing her efforts to engage with them. Others crossed their arms, waiting for her to speak. The moderator, a woman named Rachel Simmons, introduced Maya to the room. Captain Carter has agreed to come here today to answer questions and address concerns about the reforms she's pushing within the department, Rachel said, her voice carrying both curiosity and caution. Maya stood up, walking to the front of the room. She cleared her throat, knowing this was a moment of reckoning. Thank you for giving me the chance to speak with you today. I know there's been a lot of skepticism, and I understand why, but I want you to know that I'm here because I believe in the potential for change. I believe that we can make the police department better, more accountable, more transparent, and more responsive to your needs. She paused, letting her words sink in. The room remained silent, a mixture of guarded interest and uncertainty. I'm committed to the reforms we've started, but I know it's going to take time. I'm here today to listen to your concerns, because your input matters. If we're going to rebuild trust, we have to start with honest conversations. There was a long pause before someone from the crowd shouted, "How can we trust you when your officers are still treating us like criminals?" Maya took a deep breath, steeling herself for the tough questions. She had anticipated this kind of reaction and knew it was part of the process. I hear you. I know that in the past, the department's actions have eroded trust. But I promise you, that's exactly why we're making these changes, to ensure that this doesn't happen again. To make sure that no one is unfairly targeted or treated with bias. We're not perfect, but we're working every day to be better. The crowd murmured, some nodding in agreement, others unconvinced. Maya continued, I want to hear specific examples of how we can improve. What are the issues that matter most to you? One elderly man, James Harris, raised his hand. When called on, he stood up slowly, his voice firm but not hostile. I've lived in this neighborhood for 40 years, Captain. My family has seen the way the police interact with us, mostly with suspicion and hostility. You can say all the right things, but I need to see action. I need to see officers walking through this community, getting to know the people here, instead of just pulling people over because of the color of their skin. Maya nodded, acknowledging his words. James, you're absolutely right. The best way to rebuild trust is through relationships. That's why we're focusing on community policing and making sure our officers are present and active in the neighborhoods they serve. This isn't about being reactive. It's about being proactive, getting to know people, understanding their concerns, and working together to make the community safer. Another person spoke up. That sounds great, but what about accountability? How can we trust you when officers aren't held accountable for their actions? Maya knew this was a critical question. Accountability had been a central pillar of her reforms from the beginning. We're introducing new oversight mechanisms, including independent reviews of complaints and incidents involving officers. We're also making it easier for the community to file reports, and we're committed to being transparent about the results of those investigations. No one is above the law, not the officers, and not me. The conversation continued for over an hour, with people raising concerns about police conduct, the use of force, and the lack of diversity within the department. Maya answered each question as best she could, but it was clear that the road ahead would not be easy. She had gained some support, but there were still many who remained deeply skeptical. At the end of the meeting, Rachel Simmons took the microphone again. Thank you, Captain, for being here and answering our questions. But we'll be watching. We need to see the results of these reforms in our streets, in our schools, and in our neighborhoods. Maya nodded, feeling the weight of the responsibility on her shoulders. I understand, Rachel, and I'm committed to proving to you and to everyone in this community that we can do better. That evening, Maya returned home exhausted but resolute. Emma was waiting for her in the living room, a cup of tea in hand. How did it go? Emma asked softly. Maya sank into the couch, rubbing her temples. It was tough. They don't trust me, and they have every reason not to. I'm trying to convince them that things can be different, but it's going to take time. Emma sat beside her, offering a comforting presence. I think you made progress, even if it doesn't feel like it right now. People are watching, but you're showing them that you're willing to listen. That's huge. Maya smiled faintly, her mind still swirling with the day's conversations. I hope so, but I know the real work is just beginning. Over the next few weeks, Maya continued her outreach efforts. She attended more community meetings, listened to more concerns, and worked tirelessly to strengthen the relationship between the police and the neighborhoods they served. While not every meeting was as charged as the town hall, every conversation helped her understand the depth of the mistrust and the urgency of her reforms. There were many challenges, but Maya was driven by a singular truth. Change could not happen without both internal and external cooperation, and while there would be bumps along the way, she was determined to see the process through. As we reflect on Captain Maya Carter's journey, it's clear that true leadership in times of crisis requires more than just courage and determination. It demands empathy, accountability, and a willingness to listen. Maya's efforts to reform her department were met with resistance, not only from within, but from the very communities she sought to protect. Yet, instead of backing down, she chose to engage directly with the public, to take their concerns seriously, and to actively work toward earning their trust. The most powerful takeaway from Maya's story is the importance of community involvement in the process of reform. It's not enough to make changes behind closed doors or to enforce policies without understanding the lived experiences of those affected. Effective leadership, especially in law enforcement, hinges on building genuine relationships between officers and the communities they serve. Maya's decision to hold town hall meetings, to listen to difficult criticisms, and to publicly commit to transparency were crucial steps in rebuilding that fragile trust. Another key lesson is the value of accountability. The introduction of independent oversight and transparency in handling complaints were necessary reforms to ensure that those who are meant to protect the public are also held responsible for their actions. Accountability doesn't just apply to officers, it extends to leadership, and it is the foundation of lasting change. However, perhaps the most important lesson in Maya's story is resilience. She faced criticism, setbacks, and moments of doubt, but she never lost sight of her mission. Reform isn't a linear journey, and progress can often feel slow. However, it is only through persistent effort, open communication, and a shared vision that real change becomes possible. Maya's work isn't finished. In fact, it's only just beginning. But the progress she's made, despite the challenges, shows that when leaders choose to stand firm in their convictions, listen with an open heart, and take accountability for their actions, they can change the narrative and move forward. If you found this story inspiring, hit the comment section and type 1. If you thought it was incredibly powerful, please type 2. We'd love to hear your thoughts and stories. Tell us about the challenges you've faced and how you've worked to overcome them. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel to stay updated on more inspiring stories like this one. Your feedback helps us bring more real-life stories that inspire change and growth. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let's continue the conversation.